Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr Speaker, as an electorate MP in Auckland, I can tell the House quite safely that this is a moderate and reasonable measure that is enjoying support from New Zealanders in Auckland because they are seeing that this government is taking steps to try and get on top of many of the issues that they are facing when it comes to housing. And Mr Speaker, this is a good change that's being put forward because it is important that those who are speculating on property do pay an appropriate level of tax, and those that are wishing to engage in buying and selling property within a short space of time pay their fair share of tax, and that is what this bill aims to do. We've heard from parties opposite that this is not enough, that we need more. Mr Tabato says it's empty words. Ms Sage said it was an empty gesture. Well, I would just want to outline to the House all of the things we're actually doing, because in no way can it be described, the government's response to housing in Auckland, no way can it be described as an empty gesture. Mr Speaker, we have changed legislation to allow the fast-tracking of consents in Auckland to increase the supply of housing. 47,000 potential sections are available to be built on in Auckland. That's not an empty gesture. We've sped up the unitary plan process in Auckland and taken 7 years off the process's timeframe. That is not an empty gesture. It will lead to better planning law, and it will lead to changes which will open up land in Auckland much faster. That will help with housing. Mr Speaker, we have changed the law to require all people entering into a property transaction that is not their main home to provide an IRD number so we can effectively track them properly, particularly those buying and selling property from overseas. Mr Speaker, we have increased considerably the enforcement powers of the enforcement ability of IRD by increasing their budget by $33 million several budgets ago, which has brought in $8 for every dollar we have given them to enforce the current law. Mr Speaker, we're also giving IRD an extra $30 million to undertake more enforcement. That is not an empty gesture. Mr Speaker, we're going to be introducing fairly soon a withholding tax on those who are buying property from offshore so that we can ensure that we capture the appropriate tax that they should be paying properly and effectively. That is coming in soon. And finally, Mr Speaker, this particular change in this legislation where we introduce the Bright Line test, which will ensure that any person buying and selling a home that is not their main home within 2 years, that they pay tax on that appropriately. Mr Speaker, that is a program of housing responses that is reasonable and it is necessary to tackle the housing issues. When the people on the other side of the House come up with great ideas, they have to remember that many of the ideas they've tried, such as a capital gains tax, has not worked in other countries. The most important thing we can do to deal with housing is to increase the supply and ensure that those speculating are taxed properly. Mr Speaker, the government's housing response is in no way an empty gesture. It is very comprehensive, and Mr Speaker, those sitting on the other side should recognise that New Zealanders expect us to have a reasonable response, and that is exactly what we are delivering. This supplements all of the things we're doing already in the housing space. It's not the solution all by itself, but combined with many of the other factors and many of the other measures I've outlined here today, Mr Speaker, it will help housing in Auckland, it will help housing in New Zealand, and that is a good thing.